I'm Marina. I devoted 18 years to my son's education, only to be deliberately excluded from his college decision by my ex-husband and his new wife. They wanted prestige. I wanted what was best for Dima. When they went behind my back to commit him to a school he didn't even want, I withdrew my college fund. Their perfect plan collapsed, but I gave my son what he truly needed: freedom to choose his own path. I remember the exact moment I realized I'd become invisible in my own son's life. The text arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was reorganizing student papers in my classroom. Beyond the window, April sunshine streamed across the empty desks, creating long shadows that seemed to point accusingly at my phone. Just wanted to let you know we've made the decision. Dima will be attending Princeton in the fall. Victor has connections there that will serve him well. No need to worry about the paperwork. Thanks for your understanding. The message was from Natasha, my ex-husband's wife of 5 years. No discussion, no consideration. Just a notification about my son. Me only chill delivered with the clinical detachment of a weather update. I set the phone down on my desk, my hand trembling slightly. This wasn't about Princeton, this was about the we that no longer included me. Somehow, in the years since the divorce, I had been systematically edited out of the most important decisions in my son's life. Victor had always been obsessed with status: the right address, the right car, the right connections. When we were married, it was exhausting. After we divorced, it became weaponized. Natasha, with her executive position and socialite friends, fit perfectly into the narrative he wanted to craft. I was the literature teacher who lived in a modest townhouse and drove a 10-year-old Honda. In their story, I was a footnote, not a chapter. But I was the one who had stayed up late helping Dima with essays. I was the one who drove him to debate tournaments and tennis matches. I was the one who managed his dyslexia diagnosis and found the right tutors when Victor was too busy to participate. And I was the one who had been saving for his college education since the day he was born. The college fund was substantial, $287,000 to be exact. While Victor contributed to child support as legally required, I had been the one obsessively setting aside money from every paycheck, taking extra summer teaching positions and investing carefully. Victor knew about the fund but had always treated it as an assumed resource, never acknowledging the sacrifices that built it. I picked up my phone again and stared at Natasha's message, reading between the perfectly punctuated lines. We've made the decision, not Dima, not with my input. They had decided. I called my son immediately. When he didn't answer, I texted, "Can we talk about Princeton?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, Dad says it's all set, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The same dismissive phrase Natasha had used. My stomach tightened. This wasn't Dima's voice. These weren't his words. I tried again. Are you happy with Princeton? I thought NYU's film program was your top choice. Another long pause. Princeton is prestigious. Dad says film can be a hobby. Something cold settled in my chest. Dima had been passionate about filmmaking since he was 12. His application to NYU had been a masterpiece of determination, a portfolio that showcased not just talent but the kind of raw, emotional storytelling that made me certain he had found his calling. But Victor had always dismissed it. Filmmakers are either starving or lucky, Marina. Our son will have a real career. I set my phone down and looked around my empty classroom. The walls were covered with student essays and literary quotes I'd carefully selected to inspire young minds. My favorite was from Thoreau. Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you have imagined. What dreams were we forcing Dima to abandon? That evening, I drove to Victor's house. It was in the exclusive part of town-gated community, manicured lawns, houses that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. I'd lived there once, felt suffocated by it, and left with relief when we divorced. Now I punched in the gate code, Dima's birthday, the one thing Victor hadn't changed, and parked in the circular driveway. Natasha answered the door, her surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. Marina, we weren't expecting you. I need to speak with Dima and Victor, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. She hesitated, then stepped back. Victor's in his study. Dima's upstairs packing. Packing? I asked, already moving toward the stairs. For the Princeton orientation weekend. They're doing a special tour for scholarship recipients. I paused. Dima received a scholarship? This was news to me. Natasha's smile tightened. Victor's fraternity brother is on the alumni board. It's not a full ride, but it's significant. Of course, connections. Not merit, not passion connections. I found Dima in his room, folding clothes into a suitcase with methodical precision. He looked up when I entered, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. "Mom, hey." He stopped folding, a Princeton-branded t-shirt in his hands. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. He shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that my heart ached. "Dad said he'd handle it, that you'd be fine with Princeton because it's such a good school." "And what do you want, Dima?" His eyes flickered toward the door, checking if anyone was listening, then quietly, "It doesn't matter what I want." "It's the only thing that matters," I said, sitting beside him on the bed. He was silent for a long moment, then, "Knew you accepted me. I got the film program scholarship." "I know. I saw the letter." The pride in my voice was unmistakable. "Dad says film school is throwing money away, that I need something practical, connections that will set me up for life." He set down the shirt. He and Natasha have it all planned. Princeton undergrad, then Harvard Business School where her brother is an adjunct professor. "And what do you want?" I asked again. His voice when it finally came was barely audible. "I want to tell stories, Mom. I've always wanted to tell stories." We were interrupted by Victor's voice from the doorway. "Marina, what a surprise." His tone suggested it was anything but welcome. Victor had aged well, in the way that men with money and minimal stress often do. His hair was still thick, now silver at the temples, in a way that looked intentional rather than natural. His casual attire probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "We need to talk," I said, standing. "About?" He leaned against the doorframe, the picture of relaxed authority. "About making decisions regarding our son without consulting me." Victor sighed, that familiar sound of exaggerated patience. "Princeton is an incredible opportunity. I thought you'd be pleased." "I would be if it was what Dima wanted." "He's 18. He doesn't know what he wants." I felt rather than saw Dima flinch beside me. "He knows exactly what he wants. He's known for years. You just haven't been listening." Victor's expression hardened. "Film school is a fantasy, Marina. You've always encouraged his impractical side. Someone needs to think about his future." "I've done nothing but think about his future. That's why I've been saving for his education since he was born." Victor waved a dismissive hand. "And we appreciate that contribution, but this is about more than money. This is about direction." "My contribution?" I echoed. The coldness in my chest was spreading, hardening into something like resolve. "You make it sound like I dropped some spare change in a collection plate. I built that college fund penny by penny while you were building your career." "Now you're being dramatic. The point is, I interrupted, Dima has been accepted to one of the best film programs in the country. He earned that on his own merit, not through your connections." Victor's laugh was short and dismissive. "And what exactly will he do with a film degree when he can't pay rent?" I turned to Dima, who was watching our exchange with the resigned expression of someone who had witnessed this dynamic his entire life. "Pack a different bag," I said. "You're staying with me tonight." "Marina," Victor started. "We'll discuss this tomorrow," I cut him off. "When everyone has had time to think." I didn't sleep that night. Dima took my guest room, falling into an exhausted sleep almost immediately. I sat in my small kitchen, spreadsheets and bank statements spread across the table. The college fund was in my name. I had started it before Dima was born, before I even met Victor. Over the years, it had grown through careful management and relentless dedication. There was no legal obligation for me to use it for Princeton. No requirement that I handed over to fulfill Victor's Ivy League fantasies. By morning, I had made my decision. Victor called at 7 a.m., his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is childish, Marina. Bring Dima back to finish packing. The Princeton tour is tomorrow." "No," I said. The simplicity of the word felt revolutionary. "Excuse me?" I said no. Dima isn't going to Princeton, not unless he decides that's what he truly wants. There was a pause then. "We've already accepted. The deposit is paid." Then you've wasted your money. Marina, be reasonable. This is Princeton we're talking about. This is our son's life we're talking about, and you didn't even consult me. I could almost hear him pacing, that restless energy he always displayed when challenged. Fine, we should have included you in the discussion. I apologize, but the decision is made. The college fund. The college fund, I said calmly, will only be used for a school Dima chooses, without pressure, without manipulation. You can't do that. I can and I will. There was a long silence. Then, with dangerous softness, Marina, don't make me take this to court. On what grounds, Victor? The fund is in my name. I've been the sole contributor for 18 years. You've never put a dime into it beyond your court-ordered child support. Another silence, longer this time. This isn't about the money. No, I agreed. It's about control. It always has been. I ended the call before he could respond. When Dima came downstairs, I had coffee waiting. He looked tired but somehow lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted during the night. Dad called, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He's angry. Yes. Dima nodded, taking a sip of coffee. What happens now? I pushed a folder across the table. Inside was the NYU acceptance letter, the scholarship offer, and a printout of his housing options. Now you decide. Not your father, not me. You. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the folder. And the money? The college fund is for your education, Dima. Wherever you choose to pursue it, it always has been. He looked up, his eyes so like mine suddenly bright with unshed tears. I thought I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, I said softly. Always. The next 24 hours were a hurricane of texts, calls, and finally, legal threats. Victor oscillated between rage and manipulation. Natasha sent long, carefully worded messages about family unity and Dima's best interests. I stopped responding after the third threat of legal action. On Saturday morning, as Victor and Natasha were presumably attending the Princeton tour without Dima, my son and I drove to New York. The NYU Film School had arranged a special visit when I called to explain the situation. As we walked across Washington Square Park, Dima's face was transformed by a kind of wondering joy I hadn't seen since he was small. The professor who met USA woman with bright eyes and a filmmaker's observant gaze spoke directly to Dima, asking about his influences, his vision, his stories. She didn't once mention prestige or connections or practical backup plans. She talked about craft and passion and the hard work of creating something meaningful. Afterward, sitting at a small cafe near campus, Dima looked at me with absolute clarity. This is where I belong, Mom. And just like that, 18 years of saving, of sacrifice, of determined planning crystallized into something pure and right. This was why I had built the fun knot for Victor's bragging rights, not for Natasha's social climbing, but for this moment of certainty in my son's eyes. The legal threats never materialized. Victor's lawyer must have informed him that he had no claim to the college fund. The emotional warfare, however, continued. There were tear-filled calls from Natasha about family responsibility, tense messages from Victor about throwing away opportunities. Even calls from Victor's parents, who had barely acknowledged Dima's existence before Princeton entered the picture. Through it all, Dima remained resolute, his confidence growing daily as he prepared for NYU. He returned to Victor's house to collect his belongings, enduring what he later described as an intervention about my future. He left with his essential items and the quiet dignity of someone who had found his compass. 3 weeks later, I received a formal-looking envelope from Princeton. Inside was a bill for the enrollment deposit and first semester housing, $14,300, with a note from Victor. Since you've derailed the Princeton plan, you can reimburse me for these non-refundable costs. I placed the bill in my drawer without responding. The weekend before Dima left for NYU, we had dinner at my favorite local restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good food and better conversation. As we lingered over dessert, Dima said, "Dad still thinks I'm making a mistake." "I know. He says I'll regret not having the Princeton network." I considered this. Maybe. but I think you'd regret more never knowing if you could have made it as a filmmaker." Dima nodded, pushing his dessert around thoughtfully. He tried to convince me that I could transfer to Princeton next year, that I should just try NYU for a semester to get it out of my system. Of course he had. Victor never accepted defeat easily. "And what did you say?" I asked. Dima smiled a real smile, not the careful one he'd perfected over years of navigating his father's expectations. "I told him I'd rather fail at something I love than succeed at something that makes me miserable." Pride swept through me with such force it nearly took my breath away. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. That night, I removed Victor's bill from my drawer and wrote across it in red ink, "Investment redirected to actual education." I never sent it, but the act itself felt like closing a chapter. The day we moved Dima into his NYU dorm was chaotic, emotional, and perfect. His roommate was another film student, their room quickly transformed by movie posters and equipment. As I prepared to leave, Dima hugged me so tightly I felt the years collapse. He was 5, 10, 15, 18, all at once. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me." "Always," I promised. On the drive home, alone with my thoughts, I realized something profound. In trying to control Dima's future, Victor had actually been trying to rewrite his own past to create the pedigree and connections he had always coveted. But in letting Dima choose his path, I had given him something far more valuable than any Ivy League degree: the freedom to become himself. I've never regretted withdrawing the Princeton money, not for a single moment. Victor eventually stopped asking about reimbursement, though his disappointment lingered like a shadow in every interaction. Natasha, to her credit, made peace with the situation faster than expected, occasionally even asking genuine questions about Dima's film projects. As for me, I found an unexpected liberation in standing my ground. The college fund, now being steadily depleted for a purpose that honors its creation, represents not just financial planning but a kind of faith in my son, in his dreams, and in the power of choosing one's own path. Dima is thriving at NYU. His first short film was selected for a student showcase. He calls often, his voice alive with stories and ideas and the particular joy of someone who is exactly where they're meant to be. Sometimes I think about that text from Natasha, so dismissive and confident. "We've made the decision." They thought they had the final word, that my role was simply to provide the money and stay quietly in the background. They were wrong. In the end, the most important investment wasn't the college fund. It was teaching my son that his voice matters. That authenticity trumps prestige. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply to choose your own way forward, even when the people who should support you are trying to hold you back. I was removed from my son's college decision, erased from the narrative they were trying to create. But in withdrawing my financial support, I didn't just collapse their Ivy League dreams. I helped my son build something infinitely more valuable, a future that belongs truly and completely to him. I used to believe that being a good parent meant sacrificing everything for your child's success. Now I understand that true sacrifice isn't about writing checks or securing connections. It's about being brave enough to let your child become who they're meant to be, even when that journey doesn't look like the one you'd imagined. And sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on, it's letting go.